Welcome, everyone. Really good to be with you. This is our trauma-sensitive mindfulness meetup for September. If I haven't met you, my name is David Trelevin, and if you haven't been here before, these meetups are a chance for us to explore a specific topic around trauma-sensitive mindfulness, or TSM, I'll shorten it. And in this meetup, we're going to be focused on disability and accessibility inside of trauma-sensitive mindfulness, inside of practice and teaching. And I just want to say we've been really looking forward to this session. Tyler and I have been talking and texting about it all week. And we put out a call about, I think it was maybe 5 months ago, around this topic to ask if there were people in the community who might be interested in offering their experience, their wisdom here. And the response was amazing. It was really powerful. It turns out that there's a number of you who are doing work at this very specific intersection around mindfulness and disability. And you were very generous in offering your time and your resources. So that's why it took a while for us to actually have this meetup, is that we really wanted to do well by this topic. So thanks for your patience. And we're looking forward to having this session and really digging in here. And this session is really going to be about a combination of best practices and also resource sharing, which is really what we're trying to get up to inside of these meetups. So I'm going to be sharing a few thoughts about the relationship between TSM and disability. And then there's 3 people from the community who are here very generously, who are going to be sharing about their experiences around practice and around teaching. And we're also going to be sharing a resource document, which will be kind of like a live working document for all of us in the community if you'd like to be connecting with others or there's resources that you're looking for. We're aware this is a massive topic. So the main intention here is to open this conversation, and really a conversation that we know is happening in many ways. So we feel grateful to get to have it with this community. Just a few notes about the meetup. The session is going to be an hour long. Having your video on is encouraged. It's not mandatory. It's great to see you when that's possible. The chat will be open. We encourage you to engage there, share resources, and please, if you can stay somewhat on topic, that'd be great. And then for the second half of the call, we're going to be doing a live panel and question and answer with myself and also the folks that are joining us. So if you have comments and questions throughout the first half, but especially the second half, please chat them into the chat box here. And then Tyler will be choosing questions, and you'll have the chance, if you'd like to come on live, you're welcome to, or we can read the question. So speaking of Tyler is here. So Tyler, do you want to jump in here as well?
Yeah, thanks, David. Great to be with you all, as always. And yeah, as David said, we've been excited for this topic, so glad to be here. And I just have a few notes just to mention. The first is, as you may notice, we have Risa and Mel here from Pro Bono ASL. Really grateful to have them both here. Thank you both. In providing ASL interpretation. And I will drop some links here in a moment in the chat where you can donate to Pro Bono ASL. I encourage you to do that. They're doing great work. Also, you may see that the Rev Live captions are on. So down in the bottom of your Zoom, you can click the CC and you can turn those on if you would like. We also will be doing breakout rooms, optional breakout rooms at the end after the call, as we usually do, which is a chance for you all to just connect with other folks in the TSM community. And so those are optional, but those will be open for about a half an hour or so at the end, so you can just stay on for those if you'd like. And lastly, I want to mention I'll be using the Spotlight feature today to highlight the panelists and the ASL interpreters and David and all that. But if you'd like to switch out of that, you can always do that by going to the view icon up in your upper right and choosing a different view. So that's it for me. And as David said, chat questions in. I'll keep tabs on those for the Q&A portion. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Tyler. Why don't we start with a short practice just to help us arrive? So I'll be guiding us just for a few minutes here. If any of the practice feels unhelpful, you're welcome to modify the instruction for yourself. Otherwise, just invite you to begin here with a couple of deeper breaths. It's a way to support the body to settle and begin to settle the attention as well. So a gentle inhale, filling the lungs, and also a slower exhale. And a few more at your own pace, your own rhythm. Perhaps pausing at the top and letting the exhale begin to support your presence and arriving here in the session. And you might also do a gentle scan of the body right now. Simply noticing what's present here. Combing your attention through different areas of the body. You might notice where there are areas of tension or more contraction, or areas of more spaciousness and relaxation. And seeing if you can be in just some basic agreement with whatever you find. Not trying to shift your state at this point. And then invite you to experiment with a kind of intentional relaxation, different parts of the body, perhaps relaxing the jaw, releasing the jaw at the hinge, relaxing the eyes, if they can rest back into their sockets. Letting the shoulders settle, dropping away from the neck. And also releasing and relaxing the hands, feeling a sense of softness and openness. And also any touch points with the ground. Could be the buttocks in the chair, maybe the feet on the ground. And then ending here any way you wish. If there's a place that you'd like to focus your attention, this last few breaths here. Or if you'd like to make any physical contact with the body, just to extend some care and some presence, you're welcome to do that. But just knowing that we'll be shifting here in a moment. Taking a few more breaths here before we shift. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So I'll just say a couple things here before opening it up to our panel here. So just wanted to talk for a moment about, well, why this session? Why disability and trauma-sensitive mindfulness? And I mentioned this in the email that we sent out about the meetup, but TSM is fundamentally about making mindfulness practices, whatever we're offering, whether it's one-to-one interventions or group work, making them accessible. And in our particular case, it's been around trauma and people who are struggling with trauma. So, how can we offer meditation to someone whose nervous system is highly dysregulated because of trauma? Or if someone's experiencing a flashback related to trauma in meditation, how can we work with that? So we can train in trauma sensitivity and become equipped over time to really respond effectively. And I think there's a really natural bridge here to a conversation about disability. How could we offer mindfulness and meditation to someone who's experiencing some form of impairment that may or may not be impacting their ability to practice? And I just want to say personally that this is a place of learning. Like, I'm here in part with the session, both to share some thoughts around disability and TSM, but very much as a learner as well. And if there's one thing I learned in the prep over these last months, it's just how massive and complex this topic is around disability, and just a deep, deep diversity. And it really mirrors my experience around learning about trauma. So just a quick story, a number of years ago, one of my first ever group practices around trauma was a practice called Move In, Move Out, which I imagine some of you have done. We were standing in a circle. A facilitator would read a prompt, and you had the option, it was optional, of moving in or moving back out of the circle. So for example, the facilitator might say something like, move into the circle if there's ever been physical abuse in your family. And a lot of the prompts and questions were around trauma. And, for me, this is before I was a therapist, it was so humbling. I'll never forget it, just the experience of so many people who I had known for a while who were sharing some of the trauma that they had experienced. I just want to check in. I just got a little sign that my internet was unstable. Can you still hear me? Okay, good. Thank you. I'm not in the US right now, so sometimes my internet will go out. So that was a really powerful experience around trauma, was realizing, wow, in any moment, there's a whole lot happening that I'm not aware of. And similarly, this has happened around disability for me. So a couple of years ago, I was in a mindfulness group. We were doing something known as an accessibility check-in, which was very new for me. And this will be included in the resource document. But during the check-in, when we would share our name, people had the option of sharing if there were any particular needs that they had that would make the space more accessible for them. So for example, someone might have said, I'm hard of hearing, and so I would appreciate if people could speak up, or we could use this signal for people to speak up. And, having been a mostly able-bodied person, that was another moment for me of just, I was so struck by the different experiences people were having in the group that I wasn't necessarily aware of, and the unique needs that were there. And so my experience of this community is that there's a real rigor around many of you wanting to be cognizant, aware, and skilled around trauma. And I think we can extend this into different domains. And so that's the idea here with disability. I'll just say one more thing and then turn it over. Is my primary teachers here are around disability have come from 3 people in particular who have been part of what's often called the disability justice movement. This is Mia Mingus, Patty Byrne, and Stacy Milburn. Stacy actually passed away not too long ago. I'll put them into the chat here. I've included writing about them, resources for all these folks in the resource document. They're amazing thinkers around disability. And Mia in particular has had a big impact on me and really shaped TSM. And one of the core lessons that I wanted to share was Mia's encouragement to be very transparent and honest and communicate skillfully with anyone that we are offering practices to around accessibility and what we can and cannot offer. So I was in a group, I was in a group where there was just multiple conflicting needs. There was a person who had chemical sensitivities, was really sensitive to scents. There was another person whose religious practice involved actually wearing scent. Someone was really sensitive to fluorescent lighting. We couldn't afford a different space. So there was multiple needs happening. And when I talked to her about this, and her encouragement was to make clear decisions in the space, be honest with people about what was possible and to set expectations, and then fundamentally to leave people in choice around their participation. She wasn't saying, well, we can only do what we can do. It was really encouraging, striving towards creating an accessible space as much as possible, but also being aware that we're not able to always meet everyone's needs and leaving people in choice around this, which is really a core trauma sensitive principle. And if you explore Mia's writing, she's someone who's also always pointing back to the social conditions which will create these divisions around not being able to have needs met, around safety, around support. So she's a real deep thinker and have learned a lot. So I just wanted to mention those three people. So that's what I wanted to share. And I'm going to turn it over here to the three guests that we have here. So thank you again to these people for coming. They are members of the community. There was a lot of you that wanted to bring. We could have had a large group, so we had to kind of narrow it down. So I'm happy to introduce Heather Boyes. And Heather has done work specifically around disability and environmental sensitivity. Cheryl Harris is here, and she's a nutritionist who has worked with people around disabilities for decades. And Tara Breach is also here, and she's a co-facilitator with the Disability and Deaf Sangha of the Insight Meditation community in Washington. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and we're going to take a little bit of time each to share, and then we'll open it up here to the community. So Heather, can I turn it over to you here?
Yeah, thanks so much, David. So I'm Heather Boyes, and I'm an individual with many non-apparent disabilities that currently include chronic pain contributed to by fibromyalgia, facial pain, arthritis, hypermobility, and more. But what's been impacting me most in terms of accessibility is my disability of environmental sensitivities. And for me, what that looks like is I have sensitivities to many natural and synthetic chemicals, especially fragrances, but I also have an allergy component to my disability, where I have the potential to experience near anaphylaxis when I'm exposed to scented hand sanitizer and cleaning products in a space. So I've had an incredibly challenging few years. My journey into full-on disability started over a decade ago during H1N1, when in my traditional office space, there was increased use of scented hand sanitizers and cleaning products, experiencing the lip swelling that was apparent to people in the space with the true allergy component. But my exposure built up over time during that time over a decade ago, and led to a series of stroke-like migraines that caused lasting cognitive impairment on top of the chronic pain I was already dealing with from my other underlying conditions. So 2020, I knew what was coming for me in terms of accessibility and that the barriers would now literally be everywhere, and that my ongoing strategy of avoidance was going to be very, very difficult. So that's part of what I have been dealing with. So, 10 years ago, I really needed mindfulness practice in my life and found it very difficult to find a space where fragrance wasn't being used, or where there was actually a fragrance-free policy in place so that I could join a meditation group. Something that's really important for me in terms of access is that that policy is communicated in advance so that people don't appear already fragrant, and how that's communicated and if it's going to be enforced. In my case, wearing a mask doesn't help. There are olfactory receptors throughout the entire skin of the body, in every organ. It simply doesn't minimize or reduce a reaction for me. And antihistamines also don't help. I carry 2 EpiPens with me, so I've always got to be in ongoing communication with whoever's in that space with me, that they're aware of that and that they've got my emergency contact information on file. Even if I'm in a virtual space doing a meditation, I'm very rarely asked for an emergency contact. So that's something I'd just like everyone here to consider, because you may notice that even virtually, that someone may need assistance even in a virtual space. So yeah, public spaces, I have sort of a checklist when I'm going in any public space, whether it's something I'm trying to access or not. What am I looking for? So really I'm considering all my senses when I need to go and I need a lot of information in advance. So right away, I need to be able to contact someone before I go to that space to know what to expect. So what am I going to see in that space that might trigger a migraine? What's the lighting like? What am I going to smell in that space? Are you near other businesses that might be impacting the space? For example, if you open the windows, what am I going to hear in that space that may cause a flare in some way? What am I going to touch in that space that I may absorb that may cause a reaction? Is there dust? Is there mold? Has there been prior water damage? There's just a lot of consideration that goes into any in-person place that I need to go. What is that space going to feel like? And within that space, what's the airflow like? Are there windows that can open? Can I move? Can I have a spot that is more airflow or safer for me in that room? So for me, having the ability to move within a space, or if someone comes to sit beside me that may appear unintentionally fragrant, just having so many more choices and so much more information before I go anywhere. Even in terms of weather and temperature, is the class going to move from inside to outside? Then I need to know a lot more. What's in that outside space? Am I going to need my sunglasses? What electronics are being used in the space? Because electromagnetic hypersensitivity is also a component for me. So considering things like putting phone in flight mode instead of just silencing it, turning phones off. There's so much to consider that can impact me in a space. So what I'd really like to just sort of drive home is just to really consider, not just as the host of the space, but as a participant in the space, what are you bringing into that space that might have an impact on someone else? Because the overarching disability of environmental sensitivities does also include severe allergy. So just something that I personally also try not to do is I try not to bring nuts into a space with me also. Just to really be aware that it also has the allergy and the sensitivity component for anything you might be adding. And if somebody does need to leave and doesn't communicate that to you after, take the time to follow up with them as to why they've left. Environmental sensitivities is so stigmatized that it's very difficult to talk about. And for many years, I just didn't share with anyone that I was entering a space with, that I even had these challenges or needed these types of accommodations. That's no longer an option for me. So really ask yourself, who's not in the room? Who's not there? And if you have a forum to ask for feedback that can be done in any way anonymously, that would have been something in my early years that would have been so helpful if there'd been a way that I could provide that feedback without having to give my name and self-disclose. So something else that many people, is a common misconception, is that things that are natural are safe, things that are green that are safe, and things that are safe for everyone. That's usually not the case. For me, natural substances, things like essential oils, anything I can smell has more of a potential to cause a problem. So just really keep that in mind, that natural does not mean safe. Green does not mean safe, and safe does not mean safe for everyone. So that's really all I wanted to share with you today, and thank you.
Thanks, Heather. I'm wondering too if we could come back. One question that came up for me when you were talking about that there's so many different pieces that would be helpful for you to know. That
Yes.
some of those, when you just said, I was like, oh, that's new. I didn't think about, like the example, the outside, inside. So maybe if we could, I'd love to come back maybe for the whole kind of group about what would be the things that we might not think of to communicate that would be helpful. So thanks for all you shared. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Cheryl, would it be a good time for you to jump in here?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Great.
So first, again, David, thank you so much for hosting this conversation and inviting us to talk. I've been in the disability space since the mid-90s, which I think is longer than I care to think about in some ways, and been a disability advocate in many arenas and had chronic pain since then, but that didn't morph into having my own disabilities until about 19 years ago when I discovered that I had a connective tissue disorder. Initially, that showed up as difficulty walking, difficulty standing, and at some point not able to stand or walk at all, then difficulty using my hands and arms. In the last couple of years, challenges with my neck and shoulders led to migraines that lead to visual impairments. And there are some days where I have difficulty, especially with screens, and sometimes can't see screens clearly, particularly computer stuff. And all of this has made it difficult to participate in meditation classes. And so about 19 years ago, not coincidentally, the pain, both emotional pain and physical pain, led me to meditation. And I found wonderful teachers around pain. I was very lucky because I was 23, didn't know if I was ever going to walk again. And so great pain classes. And they were actually miraculously trauma sensitive, except they were not accessible. And what I mean by that is that everyone in the class had chronic pain, but I wasn't the only one who was mobility limited. So the class would be standing, but I wasn't able to stand, and the class would be doing mindful walking, and I would be watching the class do mindful walking. And I would be trying to kind of flag down the teacher and say, well, what do I do? And what, how do I adapt this? And like sort of like the, what about me? And, there were times that I was able to kind of get someone's ear and they would say, oh, you can do this or you can try that. But it really put me into this place of shame of, well, I must be doing something wrong and I'm taking up all this space and I'm taking up all this time. And this pattern played out for many years in different, MBSR classes and whatever else, where I, again, it was only me who was at least had visible disabilities, and everyone else was in a very different physical place where they may have had some impairments, but I was the only one who was as mobility impaired. And so again, layered especially on my trauma stuff, I really had the sense that I didn't belong because I was the one who wasn't like everyone else. And as the years went on, I would explicitly ask teachers, can you accommodate my disabilities? And they would say, yes, 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 of course we do. Of course we accommodate this, that, and the other. And again, I would show up and I would be watching a class doing things that I couldn't do. And after over a dozen years in the same meditation group, I got to a point where I felt that I had to leave because the same pattern kept playing out. There's more that I could say about it because, it did, from my perspective, come to an end that I'm certainly at peace with. But I did eventually find a different meditation community where it is much more inclusive and I am able to engage in a way that feels good to me. But what I really want to share is the take homes that I've both learned as a teacher and as someone who works with meditation. And the first really is a lot of what David was saying before. And so if you're working with someone and you're working as a teacher, it's knowing that it's your role to find out what someone's access needs are. It's not the student's role to be running interference. And so whether it's asking what someone's access needs are on a form, or asking themselves, or just simply saying, what would help you feel welcome here? The words don't matter, but it's just getting, what do you need to participate fully? It's not just assuming that you'll know, because there is so much shame and stigma. It's also knowing that there's a lot of overlap between pain and disability, but sometimes people have pain and they're not disabled, and sometimes people are disabled and don't have pain. So it's knowing that those two, there's a lot of overlap, but they're not the same. Another thing I wanted to mention is using the words that the human in front of you uses. So I identify as someone who's disabled. If someone called me disabled 19 years ago, I would have cried, like literally. So asking what words, or listening to what words the person in front of you uses, and using that language, because whatever language the person uses, that's the right language. It's not, the right language in textbooks or whatever else. It's their language. That's the right language. And if you don't know, asking. And the other thing that I want to just say really briefly, and I know it's a huge conversation, is considering how intersectionality plays a role, because a range of people's identity may really factor into how much stigma someone may feel, or how difficult or easy it may be for someone to feel comfortable asking for what they need in a group. So thank you all for being here and caring about the topic, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Cheryl. There's a lot of appreciation for you in the chat. Just want to mention that. And also for Heather too. Thanks everyone for the support. Tara, would you like to join us here?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for hosting this, David. It's so important. And thank you, Heather and Cheryl. A lot of what you said really resonated with me. And as somebody who has fibromyalgia and hypermobility syndrome, I've been through a lot of that. So thank you for what you shared. I co-facilitate a meditation group for people who have disabilities and who are deaf. And I'm working with the Insight Meditation community of Washington to on their diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility committee to raise our organizational competency over disability, deafness, and accessibility. This is how we do it, by telling these stories. And I'm just so happy to be here to be a part of that. My journey started with fibromyalgia about a decade ago, and I was introduced to the practice as a way to cope. And the practice off the cushion has been such a wonderful teacher and guide for me, but formal practice has been extraordinarily difficult. And I've developed a lot of shame and a lot of feelings about the fact that it's been hard for me. So I have the kind of pain that grows when you pay attention to it. And so in a sitting posture meditating, if I have discomfort in the body and I turn my attention to that discomfort, I get a burning sensation under my skin that will blanket the entire body. And I've done some pain types of meditation where you might pendulate from a neutral place or a pleasant place to a painful place in the body, but that's never really worked for me, because as soon as I went to that neutral place, it turned into one that had pain in it. And so at the end of a meditation, I might find that the only place on my body that didn't have pain was under my left eye or my lips. And as you can imagine, that's incredibly overwhelming. So it wasn't honestly until I started teacher training myself to find a way, and you uncovered the work of Willoughby Britton and your work, David, on trauma. And I thought I should be treating my pain like trauma. And when I did that, I was able to give myself this great mercy of just letting go and cutting myself some slack. And I started to develop habits that actually did start to work. Meditation is now a daily part of my practice that I am able to do because I have figured out a way for it to work for me. And some of that is simple stuff, meditating when I feel well, and not necessarily doing so when I'm in a state that might take me beyond my window of tolerance. It's very important to stay within a place that my nervous system can digest if I'm going to experience discomfort. And another thing that I do is I almost always meditate lying down, because the stress of sitting up is something that can trigger me. And so I've been able to really get in sits there. It doesn't mean that my sits aren't difficult. It does mean that they're way less often distressing. So it's been really important to introduce that to me. And that's what I've sort of rolled into my teaching, is helping people to make it a practice to discern the difference between difficulty and distress. And knowing when they're reaching that window of tolerance, like the edges of their window of tolerance, so that they can back off for themselves, and knowing what they can do in the moment to back off for themselves, and maybe even stopping the meditation altogether. So there's simple things that I direct in the meditation, which might be, if you're feeling unstable, to open your eyes and externalizing your experience so that you can gain some stability, or changing your posture so that you can get some stability. And another thing that I've done is an entire teaching on anchors and the purpose of an anchor. An anchor is there to ground us. It's to stabilize us. It's to help us be there with the present moment as things are arising. And when that anchor is distressing to somebody, it does exactly the opposite. So encouraging people to recognize when that's happening. If the breath is something that perhaps maybe you've had COVID, or you have asthma or difficulty breathing, and it's distressing for you, it's better to move through an anchor that might do what the meditation is meant to do, which is to open you up to the moment. And so I've actually done an entire teaching and practice where we go through anchors and try them on and ask questions. Am I able to stay curious? Do I feel grounded? Is this anchor relaxing or calming? Is a way to sort of introduce a way to change into something that can help the person in the moment if they're experiencing distress. And I'll just add before I end, one of the things that I do in that anchor process is include savoring. Savoring is a great way to stay open to the moment. If you savor an experience, a person, or a thing, and just really bringing that person in and putting them in your mind's eye is a good way, is a good anchor to use if you're having difficulty using the breath or the body or any other external senses. So thank you so much.
Wow, thanks, Tara. I'm so struck. I just want to thank the three of you for taking the risk of just sharing your stories here, and also your teaching and your experience. I just feel like we could have hours of conversation here, and there's a lot of appreciation that's come in for all of you, and some questions as well. And Tyler's he's like spotlighting people. He's doing all this. So I don't know, Tyler, do you still want to? I know you're tracking questions. There's been some great questions that I'm very excited to ask of the three of you. Do you want to jump in, Tyler? Or do you want me to keep going? Or?
Yeah, no, happy to. Thanks, David. Yeah, this is so great, so rich. Thanks, everyone. There was a question that came in from Karen around hypermobility syndrome. Karen, would you be willing to come on and ask your question? I can also ask it.
Hi, thank you. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what that is, and what, how to meet people's needs that live with that. I think I could make a story up in my head about, hypermobility, but I don't really know what that is. Like how that impacts somebody.
Thanks for the question, Karen. Anyone feel? I want to take it. I see Cheryl leaning in.
The irony, if I'm getting this right, is that the three of us are actually hypermobile. Did I get that right? And that Yeah, so I actually was struck by that because I just said connective tissue disorder. And I don't know whether both of you are HSD or EDS. Hypermobility spectrum disorder, what I would simply say, if it's something you're curious about, go to, and I can write in afterwards in terms of Ehlers-Danlos. I don't know what the website is, but it's a connective tissue disorder. There are 13 subtypes. It shows up differently in different people because there's connective tissue in pretty much every area of your body. So it can show up as migraines, it can show up as GI symptoms, it can show up as anaphylaxis. So it can affect your eyes, it can affect your toes, like there's no one way it can show up, but one of the main ways it can show up is pain. So there's no way to really do it justice, but I would more be apt to try to direct you to a website to learn more than to try to cram information into a tiny space.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to go on the web and try to find out the right website, but if you Google Ehlers-Danlos, EHLERS-DANLOS, you'll find information on that. But I think it's actually funny that the three of us are hypermobile.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a great question.
So just so I make sure I understand that hypermobility is like an umbrella and under it is various manifestations.
Yeah. It's an umbrella of something that, somewhere between, some of the kinds are 1 in 20,000 people, and some of the kinds are 2 to 3%. But somehow we won the lottery in terms of the three of us here, and here we are. So it's many of the people who have hypermobility syndrome do have chronic pain or disability.
Very helpful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, y'all. Keep it going here. And there's a question from Victoria Martino asking Tara specifically a little bit more about the savoring as an anchor. Victoria, would you like to come on and frame your question?
Sure. Hello? Oh,
Yeah,
hi.
go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Yes, again, I don't know if it's, if I'm the only person here who's unfamiliar with the practice of savoring, so I'm happy to look it up on my own, but I'm particularly interested in that in this context because it sounded like something that is a good practice when trying to, focus away from, distress or whatever, and something that's positive. So, but maybe I've missed it. So I'd just love to hear you speak a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Victoria. I would actually say that it is a way to open to the experience rather than, say we're in mindfulness is an open, non-judgmental sort of framework, and hypervigilance is a closed off, fearful sort of framework. And when we're in pain, we tend to switch to that hypervigilant state, and a way to turn ourselves to open up and be more readily able to be with the experience is to do a practice that opens us up. And so savoring is a resource. And it is something as simple as, for me, I use my dog a lot. I have a really cute Chihuahua whose name is Peter Pan. And I will think about Peter Pan and how he looks at me lovingly, and just like all of the cute things that he's done. It's just really large imagery of something that brings you joy or that will open your heart, because the idea is, instead of closing in like pain or a physiological symptom might do to you, you want to be able to open. And then what tends to happen when you're able to do that is you're able to be there with it in a way that you weren't necessarily able to be there when you're looking for threat. because when you're there with it, it's able to shift, it's able to change. It's not kind of stuck in what you think it will be, if that makes sense. So some people use beaches, love to be on the beach, just putting themselves in that, sensing, smelling how it feels. And what you're doing, your mind's still going to be taken away, just like it would if you were focusing on the breath. You'll get distracted by your symptoms. And the idea is to gear it back toward something that will help you open. And then to notice while that's happening, if there's any shifts in the body. Notice if your heart's opening. Notice if there's a subtle, is it relaxing? And just asking yourself those questions can be really helpful. Does that help?
Yes. So in a sense, and maybe I don't know, this is a strange way to think of it, but it's a kind of fortifying also. It gives you, does that make sense that it gives you the fortitude then by opening up and releasing you from the hypervigilant state?
I think that's a wonderful way to say it. Yeah.
It's kind of like a well, right now I'm just giving a series of lectures on Dante's Divine Comedy, and the idea that he always has a guide with him who gives him the courage to face the things he's facing, that is always with him. And so this imaging that whatever we're savoring is fortifying us to like you said, to open us up in a safe way.
Right. And a lot of times physiological symptoms change in nature. And sometimes we get stuck in them because we're stuck in that fearful state. And it's just a way to allow a greater possibility for transition.
Mm-hmm.
So
beautifully expressed.
I could just jump into on that I think this bridge here with the trauma work, that's such often a core aspect of trauma work, is if we're needing a resource on some level to be able to work with, not to just skip over the pain. Victoria, I hear you talk with a guide, but actually to be able to open to greater and greater distress and difficulty without becoming fully dysregulated. So I think it's a really cool, again, bridge here between the savoring and the anchor with some of the TSM work. So I love it. I think that's really powerful.
Thank you. Thank you both of you.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you.
There's just a lot of questions here. I know Tyler's like sorting them. So
yeah, there's a great one. David, was there any that jumped out to you?
no, please go for it. There's so many here.
Okay, awesome. So Janice Goldhaber, hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. You had a question around visual impairment and learning disability. Would you open to coming on and asking your question? If you'd like to come on, you can unmute yourself. Otherwise, I can ask your question. No problem.
I have found over many years of meditating as a visually impaired person, legally blind and learning disabled. And by the way, somebody who doesn't type, so I'm not sure what my question looked like. That I am not always able to find my own resources or understand what will help me either in person in a group or on Zoom, as we are doing now, to understand my best road in, define my own ways to adapt. And I have worked with a few people to help them learn how to ask the right questions, to help those of us that don't know how to resource, given our lifelong, just use the word disability, I don't like it very much, our lifelong hindrances and boundaries. So I'm wondering how others of you have dealt with people that don't always know how to resource or understand how their issues get in the way of their being able to find their ability to resource, if that makes any sense.
Such a great question. Any of you inspired to jump in? Heather, you haven't had a chance to share. Are you interested in sharing anything here?
Sure. I think underlying that for me is that even when I don't feel up to it, I've got to teach people what I need. And it's something that's so very hard, and ask a lot of questions. And if I can't do something, I need to tell them I can't do it, because so often for me, as with my other panelists, I can't always access things visually. Sometimes I can't access things in an auditory manner. I need to have those choices. So if someone says, oh, well, you can just go to this website, that's not always going to work for me. And when I go to that website, the website may not be meeting those website content accessibility guidelines of being simple enough for me not to be overwhelmed by the information, by whatever's going on for me at that time. So sometimes I will directly ask people, no, you need to tell me what's in that space. Verbally, I need to hear it, or give it to me in a very simple list. So the more clear I can be with narrowing down the essence of what I need, the more help that I can get and working with that person together. But that it's up to me to really continuously teach them what I'm going to need in any given interaction.
Might I add to that as well?
Yeah, please.
It's so good to see you, Janice. Thank you for bringing this up. I think that what you brought up is really important to highlight, which is that need isn't static, and that we don't always know, and that we're learning as we go sometimes, and to remember that as providers, that that the need might change or shift in nature, and the idea of being there and being willing and being open to explore that space in the way that we practice, in a non-judgmental, open, curious way, is very helpful to remember to apply our practice to this area specifically when somebody might not know what they need, but have the willingness to be with them to help guide them to figure it out, I think is really important. So I just wanted to add that piece.
Tara, it sounds like that's where mindfulness would be so useful. Like what you just said about that was a real light bulb about need not being static, and that there needing to be a continual process of actually the awareness, which can be supported both by facilitators or teachers and through the practice itself. Am I hearing that right? That mindfulness would be really useful. It could be useful there.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Cheryl, I think I saw you leaning in. Did you want to share before?
Yeah, it sounded like, Janice, that there were two parts to your question, and that one part was understanding what you needed, and then the other part was the accessibility. And that I feel like, Tara and Heather did a wonderful job of speaking to the figuring out part. And I just wanted to mention that since I have visual impairments too, and initially I felt so overwhelmed by how to handle the visual accessibility, and that I would say that there are a ton of screen readers and Microsoft Edge and programs that talk to you, and that I found those really hard initially to get used to, but that if you are okay with auditory stimuli coming at you, and you can slow them down if that helps too, but that you can have things read to you, especially PDFs, and if that makes it accessible. I know that one of the meditation groups I'm in, we get readings and all of them come as PDFs because PDFs will talk to you. That if there's a way to get material in a way that's accessible for you, that may be a way that you can have a group meet you where you are. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Cheryl. Janice, anything you want to add here before we shift?
Yes, but I'm not exactly sure how to put it. I've been meditating my whole life, and my field is and has been low vision and blindness. So I understand the accessibility, but I don't think the meditation world always understands the complications of using that accessibility while trying to be mindful and attentive to one's own needs. So I think it's a conversation we will keep having. And some of the conversation will be helping people understand that not all things will work, and that sometimes we have to create a workaround or create something new in the experience, or not feel shamed because the experience isn't accessible or possible or workable. Yeah. So for me, part of it there's a shame element that can jump in here so quickly, and to help people not feel that shame, but to find a way for them to be able to sit with something that is comfortable and good for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Janice. This theme of shame, I feel like really runs through here. And I imagine if we have a second conversation, maybe we could explore it deeper. I'll just say, I know Tyler's tracking this too. There's many questions around things like neurodivergence, how to work around mindfulness, posture. There's so much more we could dig into. And we're coming close to the end of the call. So Heather, Cheryl, and Tara, I'm wondering if you could just take a minute each. I just want to give you the last word here. Anything that you'd want to, knowing that, again, massive conversation that will continue as Janice, as you were just saying, anything that you'd like to share in closing here with the community? Not to tie it up in a bow, you know what I mean? Not to try to like, but just want to give you the last word.
Something that I had wanted to mention was just how prevalent sensitivity to fragrance is. It's estimated that over 30% of the general population internationally experiences some kind of adverse health impact from fragrance. So it's a much larger number than people know. And environmental sensitivities are incredibly underdiagnosed. And it's becoming a symptom of long haul COVID to develop multiple chemical sensitivities, currently being reported as rare because of the underdiagnosis. But just something to be really, really aware of, you know, you're impacting 30% of any population potentially. And just that when someone does come to you and share that they have a need in this area, when they've been that vulnerable with you, to believe them.
Thanks, Heather. Tara?
Yes, so I'll end with this. Is on Monday night, I asked my Sangha if they could share anything about their disability or being deaf and how it works with practice with somebody, what would it be? And the response was overwhelmingly about access and understanding. For the deaf population, most of the meditation world is still very inaccessible, and it doesn't have to be. We have pro bono services like this. We can share that cost across the community. Participants would be more than willing to help make a space inclusive, and we can encourage our organizations to provide ASL for our meetings. When we do provide it, people show up. We started the group 2 years ago. We had one deaf person. Now the third of our group is deaf. So it is really important, and those voices are really important to learn from. So I think that I just wanted to add that. And then just quickly about understanding, we need to keep having these conversations and telling our stories, because the more we tell our stories, the more people will understand how to have that conversation with us. So I really appreciate you providing that opportunity today, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. Yeah, time in conversations. And Cheryl, you want to bring us home?
Yeah, you know, the theme that we heard time and time again was shame. And so what I would say is, knowing that shame shows up and rears its ugly head time and time again, we really need to expect that shame will be in the room, and pause and be gentle with ourselves and with whoever we're sitting across from, whether it's literally or across the Zoom screen, and expect that we may not know what to do, and expect that who we're with may not know what to do, and just be gentle. Expect that there's going to be a learning process, expect that it may be bumpy, and expect that it's probably going to be new all around, but that we're probably going to learn, and whoever we're with is going to, like, everyone's going to be better for having a more diverse and inclusive space.
Thanks, Cheryl. That seems like a powerful place to end. Thank you so much to the three of you for sharing so honestly and vulnerably, and also sharing your just the practices here that you've learned, the hard won over time. And thank you all for being here. So couple quick announcements about ways to continue. I'm just going to chat into the box if we will send you this document, but that is a Google, oh, now it's flying up in the chat. That's a Google document that we're going to be compiling with different resources. We'll also send the chat out, but there's been a number of people that were not here necessarily speaking who said they're doing work around traumatic brain injury, for example. There's a lot of powerful resources in the community. So that document is going to be a living document. If you'd like to be on there and say, if you're interested in connecting, please email us at our support address, which is on the website, but it's support@davidtrelevin.com. I'll put it in the box. And just let us know. You could send a paragraph with your contact info, and we want to help you connect. If you want to continue the conversation outside of this space, then we're all for it. So that's all I wanted to say. Just big thank you. Tyler, anything you want to say before we shift off here?
No, other than thanks so much to our panelists and everyone who joined in, and everyone here on the call, and just to stick around for the optional breakout rooms if you'd like to connect with other folks in the community.
And thank you finally to Pro Bono ASL. We'll put their links in here if you'd like to contribute, as was just shared about ways to spread the support and costs around. So yeah, we'll have the breakout rooms in a moment if you'd like to hang around. And the prompt here in the breakout rooms is questions that you're in or any comments about the session. And just want the panelists to know there's a lot of appreciation here inside of in the chat. So we can unmute ourselves. You can say goodbye. Have a great day. And if you'd like to hang around for short breakout rooms, please do. And we'll see you all really soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
See you